Okay, class, so we're back again for week one, part two. So I appreciate you going through this process with me, and we're just going to pick up where we left off. So, from the last slide, we talked about the historical content of management, and we talked about the scientific management perspective, and we talked about the classical management perspective. So now we're moving on to the classical management perspective as it relates to today. And we know that the classical management perspective and some of the many management techniques and approaches are still being used today. For example, the human resources and the labor that Mr. Owen and Charles Babbage we discussed in some previous slides. So contemporary organizations still use some of the bureaucratic procedures in areas of business to business, digital commerce, and supply chain management. They also propose universal guidelines that we now recognize do not fit every organization. So here are some of the contributions. It provides many management techniques that we just talked about that we still use today. It focuses on its attention on management as a meaningful field of study. And some of the limitations that the classical management perspective has is more appropriate for use in stable, simple organizations rather than complex organizations of today. Because remember, they tried to use a universal one where that was more of a one size fits all, and we know that doesn't work in every situation, especially not in healthcare. And we also, another limitation is proposed universal guidelines and the slighted role of the individual in the management process. So as we continue on, we're just going to build on what we've discussed previously. We're just continuing to build on. So hold on, enjoy, and I'll see you at the end. This next slide talks about the behavior management perspective, which emphasizes individual attitudes and behaviors and group processes. Basically, behavior management perspective was stimulated by many writers and theoretical movements. Remember, we talked about um, Robert Owen and Charles Babbage and how they came about. And then when they got together with other people who wanted to write down their thoughts and ideas about how management should be, and this became the behavior management perspective. And what it does is it places more emphasis on individual attitudes, behaviors, and group processes, and it also recognizes the importance of behavior processes in the workplace. So we have advocates, whereas we had pioneers the last time. So we have advocates of behavior management. We have Hugo Munsterberg, which advocated applying psychology concepts to employee selection and motivation. And then we have Mary Parker Follett, which recognized the importance of behavior in the workplace. So Munsterberg suggested that psychologists could make valuable contributions to managers in areas of employee selection and motivation. We kind of have that same concept going on today when we do um, personality surveys, when we do those kind of things, and they ask you different questions about if you saw a coin on the floor, would you pick it up and put it in your pocket, or would you find its owner and give it back, those kind of things. So we still use it whereas before they actually used psychologists in the workplace. Mary, she recognized again the importance of human resources behavior in the workplace. So her work clearly anticipated the behavior management perspective, and she appreciated the need to understand the role of behavior in organizations. And that goes back to what makes the employee happy, what makes the employee sad, what makes this employee work harder than the next employee. Next up in the behavior management perspective is the Hawthorne studies conducted at the Western Electric's Hawthorne plant between 1927 and 1932. There were experiments during that time, and it was sponsored by General Electric and conducted by Elton Mayo and his associates. So they did these three different experiments to see how it would affect the employees. So you had the illumination study, which he took light and adjusted the light to see how productivity would be affected by the light, if it was brighter light or if it was lower light. Then he did a group study, which he offered employees more money to see how that would affect the productivity outcome. Would they still be would people start to underproduce or overproduce during this time? And then he did the interview program, and this is where they saw that human behavior was much more important in the workplace than they had previously believed. So, in short, individual and social processes played a major roles in shaping worker attitudes and behaviors. Basically, they had to do these experiments to see how it would affect the people. Because even if you have a happy employee, after a while they slow down and they don't produce as much as they used to. Here we are talking about the human relations movement, which grew out of the Hawthorne studies. And remember, Robert Owen touched on that because he believed that the importance of the organization's human resources, and he expressed concern for personal welfare of his workers. So he started it, and then Hawthorne grew with it, and now we have the human relations movement. It proposed that workers respond primarily to social content of work, including social conditioning, group norms, and interpersonal dynamics. Basically, they want to have people to talk to, they want to be in a group, they don't really want to be by themselves. The next is assumed that the manager's concern for workers would lead to increased worker satisfaction and improved work performance. I want to stop right there and just say, do you think that's true? If your manager shows you concern for yourself, your family, do you really think that leads to improved worker performance? Think about that. I do. I mean, it just shows that you care when you take the time out to know who your people are. And I have to tell you, with three facilities and all different personalities, I really tried to take my time and get to know each one of my managers, who has children, who's married, and the providers that I work with. It's more personable, and I think they appreciate it. What do you think? This slide represents the next set of trendsetters in the human relations movement. Maslow, which advanced a theory that suggested that people are motivated by the hierarchy of needs, including monetary incentives and social acceptance. Maslow hierarchy perhaps The best known human relations theory is described later on in the book. Meanwhile, you have Douglas McGregor and his models, theory X and theory Y, represents the essence of human relations movement. According to McGregor, theory X and theory Y reflect two extreme belief sets that different managers have about their workers. So theory X is that negative view of workers consistent with the scientific management theory, and theory Y is that positive view of workers that represent assumptions made by human relation advocates. In McGregor's view, theory Y was more appropriate philosophy for managers to adhere to. So you're going to tell us what kind of view we should have of our workers. But we know that there are some times when we do have that theory X view where we have that worker who is that negative view of those workers. You know which ones I'm talking about. Always late, on their phone, half do the work. We can't help it. We're human. So moving right along, we're talking about contemporary behavior, science, and management. So we have major contributors of this movement. We have Musterberg, Mayo, Maslow, McGregor. They've all made some valuable contributions here. But things have changed. Current behavioral perspectives on management is now known as organizational behavior, which acknowledges that human behavior in organizations is such more complex than the human relationists realize. So all this time they thought it was going to be this simple thing, but it's more complex. Humans are very complex beings. So what they're saying is that the field of organizational behavior draws from a broad interdisciplinary base of psychology, sociology, anthropology, economics, and medicine. Important organizational behavior topics include job satisfaction, motivation, stress, group dynamics, the structure and design of organizations. However, primary contributions of this approach relates to how it has changed managerial thinking. Managers are now more likely to recognize the importance of behavior processes and to view employees as valuable resources instead of mere tools. Organizational behavior is still relatively imprecise in its ability to predict behavior, especially the behavior of a specific individual. It is not always accepted or understood by practicing managers. Hence, the contributions of the behavior school are just beginning to be fully realized. So basically, what we've learned from the behavior science management portion, relations movement, the Hawthorne studies, um, the classical management perspective, is that they were studying behaviors of employees and they thought it was something simple. And in fact, it's more complex than what they thought. So now schools are really talking about behavior management and organizational behavior and things of that nature. This slide talks about the contribution and limitations of the behavior management perspective today. Here we're talking about quantitative management perspective. It was considered the third major school of management that began to emerge during World War II. And during the war, government officials and scientists in England and the United States worked to help the military deploy its resources more efficiently and effectively. So, these groups took some kind of mathematical approaches to management, developed decades early. Remember, because Taylor, he was a mathematician, and applied these approaches to logistical problems during the war. And this helped Allied forces manage logistical problems, and it focused its decision making, cost effectiveness, mathematical models, and use of computers to solve quantitative problems. There are two branches of quantitative approach: management science and operations management. Management science focuses on the development of representative mathematic models, which at its basic level means management science focuses on models, equations, and similar representations of reality. For examples, managers at Detroit Edison. Side note, I wanted to give this example because it talked about Detroit Edison, which is no longer in Detroit anymore, but it was a huge, huge, huge thing back in the day. Back to the example. So managers at Detroit Edison used mathematical models to determine how to best route repair crews during blackouts. Another example is Citizen Bank of New England used models to figure out how many tellers they need to be on duty at each location at various times throughout the day. Now, operations management is basically concerned with helping the organization produce products or service more efficiently. So, unlike management science, which is mathematical and statistically sophisticated, operations management can be applied more directly to the managerial situations. So, when we think of operations management, it's a form of applied management science. I hope that makes sense to you. So, management science uses mathematical models, whereas operation management is how can we help the organization produce its products or services more efficiently, and can be applied to a wide range of problems. So now we're talking about the quantitative management perspective as it is today. So like the other management perspectives, the quantitative management perspective has made contributions and has certain limitations. So some of the contributions include it provides managers with abundance of decision-making tools and techniques. It increases understanding of overall organizational processes. It's particularly useful in areas of planning and control. And some of the limitations include cannot fully account for individual behaviors and attitudes. Competence needed may retard the development of managerial skills. And it typically requires a set of assumptions that may not be realistic. Because remember, in the mathematical science, the management science one, they talked about it using mathematical models and then it looked for representation of reality. But we know that you can't, it's not realistic. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about systems perspective. So, what is a system? A system is an interrelated set of elements functioning as a whole. And this is another management term. So, what this is saying is by viewing organizations as systems, we can better understand the importance of their environment and the level of interdependence among their organizational subsystems. So, a system within a system. Managers must also understand how their decisions affect and are affected by the organization's other subsystems. So it's basically, how do we work together? It's almost like the organization where it's a collaborative group and then it goes down into the managers. So the system is like, um, I'm gonna use the healthcare, of course, hospital system. So we have a group of different facilities and we funnel patients through to get to the hospital for specialist visits, CAT scans, and um, MRIs. So they're interrelated and functioning as a whole, because even in the system, these small clinics contribute to the bottom line. This slide just shows how the systems are interdependent upon each other. So you have um, the inputs of the environment, the transformations of process, and the outputs, all of, and then you get feedback. So they all work together. They're interdependent on each other. So this is what the systems look like. So you have an open system. That's where the organization system that interacts with its environment. The system perspective also stresses the importance of subsystems. So that's systems within systems, just like I told you. Then you have a closed system. Well, that system that does not interact with its environment. So they kind of run with just themselves. They don't include any outsiders. So you have subsystems, a system within each another system. Then you have synergy. That's when two or more subsystems are working together to produce more than the total of what they might produce working alone. Almost like the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. So they are two subsystems working together to produce more than they might have produced if they were working Sprint alone or T-Mobile alone. And then you have entropy, the normal process leading to the system decline. When an organization does not monitor feedback from the environment, make appropriate adjustments, it may fail. For example, the demise of Blockbuster or Circuit City. Each of these organizations went bankrupt because it failed to revitalize itself and keep pace with the changes in its environment. The primary objective of management from a systems perspective is to continually re-energize the organization to avoid entropy. That's interesting that they said that. I bet that they thought that no one else was going to be better than them. I mean, as the world changed, Blockbuster didn't change with it. By the way, Blockbuster was my very, very first job. Yeah, I was 17 years old. The next, under the contemporary management perspectives, is the contingency perspective. And it's broken down into two: universal perspective and contingency perspective. So what this means, they're slightly different. Where universal, they try to identify one best way to manage organizations. That goes to the one size fits all. They include the classical behavior and quantitative approaches. So they feel like it's all the same. We can use the same solution to solve this problem, this problem, this problem the same. Whereas the contingency perspective suggests that appropriate managerial behavior in a given situation depends on or is contingent upon the unique elements in a given situation. Basically, contingency is, you have two people that come in late. One comes in late because they don't care, and the other one comes in late because they have daycare issues. You have to deal with both situations, but you may deal with them differently. Okay, boys and girls, we are down to the last slide of week one, chapter one. And we're ending off with contemporary management issues and challenges. So there's a lot of issues and challenges that go into contemporary management. And if you follow me along in the book, um, managers today face an imposing set of challenges as they guide and direct the fortunes of these companies. So some of the challenges are, and I can tell you one significant challenge is globalization of a product and service market. Products are being launched all over and trying to keep all of that contained. Um, the use of quality as the basis for competition. Everybody loves quality. Meeting the challenges of a recovering economy. So not only are we dealing with globalization, our money being, our products being sent somewhere else, we're also trying to stay relevant in an economy that continues to go up and down. It's difficult to move through that. We also have to deal with an increasingly diverse workspace, whether that's um, ethnic workspace, we different with the ethnicities, or even just the different type of people that's in our workspace. We have millennials, we have Generation X, we have baby boomers that are all still working together, and having to deal with that is a challenge because in each one of those groups they were taught to have a different type of work ethics. So that is it for week one, chapter one. Again, I tell you that I appreciate you choosing UMA to be your school. Um, and I know this is your first course, and all this information seems overwhelming, but I promise you, we will get through this. Make sure you read your book, it's important. Um, You can review this PowerPoint again and again if you want. Remember that what I'm giving you is not it's not, you know, one thing. I'm trying to formulate the words. It's late. It is not something that you have to remember and give it all back to me verbatim. What I'm giving you is just a foundation. I want to give you a solid foundation as you move throughout UMA and into your career. Remember, we can be colleagues in the near future. So this foundation needs to be solid so you can build on it. That's what I'm trying to do. All of this information is just a brief summary, a review of what I think is important. But that doesn't mean that there's not something else in the book that's important that you should know. So what I'm saying is make sure you read the chapters because there's some good information in there. Some stuff that I forgot about management actually that I said I was going to um, make sure I implement myself with my managers that I have. So again, I enjoyed you guys, and I'll see you for week one, chapter two, part one on a later date. Bye.